This is a message from a viewer named Graham, and when I finished reading his email, I sat in silence for 20 minutes trying to process what he'd done. It's not your typical love scam story where someone realizes too late they've been manipulated. It's something far more calculated. Because Graham Whitmore didn't panic when he discovered his wife was stealing from him. He didn't confront her, didn't threaten her, didn't even let her know he was aware. Instead, this 59-year-old former internal audit manager from British Columbia did what he'd spent 30 years doing in corporate manufacturing plants. He documented everything, stayed calm, and let the system he quietly built around her tighten until there was no escape. What makes his story so unsettling is the patience it required. For 3 months, Graham pretended to be confused, trusting, and naive while his wife grew bolder with each forged signature. By the time she realized what was happening, Graham had already handed a complete forensic case file to Thai authorities. This isn't a story about revenge or dramatic confrontation. It's about something more chilling, watching someone you married systematically incriminate themselves while believing you're too simple to notice. While you're watching, let me know where you're tuning in from in the comments. I always read them. If these stories mean something to you and you want to support the channel, there's a super thanks button below, completely optional, but it helps me continue bringing you these cases that rarely get told. If you've been enjoying the stories I tell, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Your support is crucial for the growth of this channel and helps me dedicate time to making these videos despite my commitment to a full-time job. Thank you for being here. My name is Graham Whitmore, and I need to tell you how I spent 3 months pretending to be the fool my wife believed I was. But to understand why I made that choice, you need to understand where I was in my life when I met Warrenthra. Vancouver, British Columbia, March 2022. I was 57 years old and recently divorced after a 28-year marriage that had dissolved not with drama, but with the quiet acknowledgement that 2 people had simply grown into strangers. My first wife Sandra and I had no children. We'd tried for years before accepting it wasn't going to happen, and by the end, our conversations consisted entirely of logistics about bill payments and whose turn it was to take the car for service. The divorce was civil, even friendly. We split everything down the middle. I kept the retirement investments, she kept her teacher's pension, and we sold the townhouse in Burnaby for 610,000 Canadian dollars. After legal fees and splitting the proceeds, I walked away with 305,000 plus another 380,000 in liquid savings I'd accumulated over 3 decades of steady employment. I'd worked as an internal audit manager for a mid-sized manufacturing company that produced industrial refrigeration components. It wasn't glamorous work, but it taught me something valuable. People don't usually set out to commit fraud. They rationalize small deviations from protocol, then slightly larger ones, until they're so deep in deception they can't see a way out. My job was to catch those deviations before they became catastrophic. The pattern was always the same. Someone would start bypassing approval processes for efficiency. They'd create workarounds that seemed reasonable at first. They'd assure everyone that the shortcut was temporary, that proper documentation would follow later. And by the time I was called in to investigate, there would be a trail of missing invoices, unauthorized expenditures, and a very nervous employee who'd convinced themselves they hadn't really done anything wrong. I learned to be patient during investigations. Confronting people too early just made them defensive and careful. The better approach was to let them feel safe, let them continue their patterns while I quietly documented everything, and only present the evidence when the case was complete and irrefutable. I never imagined I'd need to use those same techniques in my personal life. After the divorce was finalized in January 2022, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Possibility. I was 57, financially secure with a monthly income of $3,600 from my pension and dividend investments, and completely free to do whatever I wanted. Sandra had been a homebody who found comfort in routine. I'd spent almost 3 decades eating dinner at 6:15, watching the same television programs, taking the same vacation to the same cabin on Vancouver Island every August. Now, I could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. I'd always been fascinated by Southeast Asia, the complexity of the cultures, the intersection of traditional and modern, the sheer differentness of it all. In March 2022, I booked a 3-week trip to Thailand. Not a resort vacation, but a genuine exploration. Bangkok, Chiang Mai, Ayutthaya. I wanted to see the country beyond the tourist infrastructure. That's where I met May. I met Warintha Kongsikul. She introduced herself as May, saying her Thai name was too difficult for foreigners at a business hotel in Bangkok, where I was staying during the second week of my trip. She worked as an administrative coordinator for the hotel's conference center, managing event bookings and corporate accounts. I'd gone down to the business center to print some travel documents when she offered to help me navigate the printer system. She was 32 years old, spoke excellent English with a slight British accent from studying abroad, and had a professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. There was no flirtation, no obvious interest, just competent assistance and a friendly smile. We ended up talking for about 20 minutes. She asked about my trip, and I mentioned I was trying to understand Thai business culture as someone who'd spent his career in corporate environments. She seemed genuinely interested and offered insights about how relationship-based Thai business practices were, how trust and personal connection mattered more than contracts in many situations. Before I left, she mentioned that if I wanted to see Bangkok from a local perspective rather than a tourist one, she'd be happy to show me some neighborhoods I wouldn't find in guidebooks. She wrote her phone number on the back of a hotel business card. I'm not naive. I know that single foreign men in Thailand are often targeted by women looking for financial security, but something about May seemed different. She had a good job, spoke professionally, and wasn't asking me for anything. I decided to take her up on the offer. Over the next week, May showed me a Bangkok I never would have discovered on my own. We visited neighborhoods where locals actually lived, ate at restaurants that had no English menus, walked through markets where I was the only foreigner in sight. She was knowledgeable, funny, and seemed to enjoy explaining the complexity of her culture to someone genuinely interested in understanding rather than just consuming. There was an ease between us that I hadn't felt in years. Not romantic chemistry exactly, at least not at first, but compatibility. We could talk for hours without awkwardness. We could sit in comfortable silence. We laughed at the same absurdities. By the end of that first week, we were spending every evening together. By the second week, it had evolved into something unmistakably romantic. I know what you're thinking. A 57-year-old divorced man falls for a woman 25 years younger in Thailand. It's a cliché, so obvious it should have embarrassed me. But I'd spent 3 decades married to someone I'd grown incompatible with, and suddenly, here was a woman who seemed interested in my thoughts, my experiences, my perspective on the world. May never ask about money. She paid for her own meals, insisted on splitting costs for activities we did together, and seemed almost embarrassed when I offered to pay for things. She talked about her career goals. She wanted to eventually move into hotel management and her frustrations with Thai corporate culture that often promoted based on connections rather than competence. She lived in a modest apartment in Samut Prakan, about 40 minutes from central Bangkok. She showed me photos of her family. Her parents ran a small electronics repair shop. Her younger brother was studying engineering at a regional university. Normal, working-class Thai life, nothing lavish, nothing suspicious. When my 3-week trip was ending, we had the conversation that I suppose was inevitable. I didn't want to leave. She didn't want me to go. We'd spent nearly every day together for 2 weeks, and the connection felt real and rare. I'm going to come back, I told her. I'll extend my tourist visa or figure out a retirement visa. I want to see where this goes. She smiled, touched my hand, and said, I want that too. But please don't make promises because you're caught up in vacation feelings. Go home. Think about whether this makes sense for your real life, not just your Thailand adventure. If you still want to come back in a month, I'll be here. That response, the caution, the lack of pressure, the emotional intelligence convinced me more than anything else that this was genuine. I flew back to Vancouver, sold my remaining furniture, put a few boxes of personal items in storage, and booked a return ticket to Bangkok for 6 weeks later. I was doing this. At 57 years old, I was starting over in a country I barely knew, with a woman I'd known for 2 weeks. Everyone I told thought I was insane. I returned to Bangkok in June 2022 with 2 large suitcases and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. May picked me up at the airport, and the moment I saw her smile, I knew I'd made the right decision. The first few months were genuinely happy. I rented a furnished apartment in the Ekamai neighborhood, nothing fancy. 28,000 baht per month, about 1,000 Canadian dollars while I figured out my long-term plans. May and I settled into a comfortable routine. She worked during the day. I explored the city and started studying Thai language basics, and we spent our evenings together cooking, walking, talking about everything and nothing. She introduced me to her friends, other young professionals, hotel workers, a few expats she'd met through work. Her family invited me to visit their shop in Samut Prakan, and her parents treated me with warmth and curiosity. Her father spoke almost no English, but he showed me around the shop with obvious pride, demonstrating how he could repair circuit boards and salvage components from broken electronics. May never asked me about money directly, but I could tell she was curious about my situation. How could I afford to just move to Thailand and not work? Was I independently wealthy? Had I retired early? I explained my circumstances honestly. I'd worked for 30 years, saved carefully, and now had enough pension and investment income to live modestly without working. In Canada, $3,600 a month would be tight. In Thailand, it was comfortable, even generous. I could afford a decent apartment, good food, occasional travel, and still save a little each month. She seemed impressed, but not overly interested in the details. She never asked exactly how much I had saved or what my total assets were. She respected my privacy in a way that felt genuinely Thai. The culture here generally considers it rude to ask direct questions about personal finances. By September, we'd moved in together. She gave up her small apartment in Samut Prakan and moved into my place in Ekamai. Rent, utilities, food, I paid for everything. But she insisted on contributing by handling all the household management, cooking most meals, and taking care of the domestic logistics that I still didn't understand in a foreign country. It felt balanced. It felt real. By November, we were talking about marriage. I know it seems fast. 4 months from meeting someone to discussing marriage would be rushed anywhere, but especially in a cross-cultural relationship where power dynamics and financial incentives create so much room for exploitation. But here's what convinced me May was different. She kept working. She never once suggested she should quit her job and have me support her. She maintained her independence, her own income, her own social life separate from mine. And when we talked about marriage, she was cautious. "Graham, you need to be sure," she said one evening as we sat on the small balcony of our apartment, looking out over the chaotic Bangkok traffic below. "Marriage in Thailand is different from what you're used to. There are cultural expectations, family obligations. You'll become part of my family's network, not just my husband. Are you ready for that?" I told her I was. I'd spent 3 decades in a marriage that felt more like a business partnership than a romantic relationship. I wanted something different this time. I wanted connection, warmth, the feeling of being chosen by someone who genuinely cared about me. We got married in a small ceremony in January 2023. It wasn't a traditional Thai wedding with elaborate rituals and hundreds of guests. May said she didn't want that. She wanted something simple, just immediate family and a few close friends. We had a Buddhist blessing at a local temple, a small reception at a nice restaurant, and then registered the marriage at the district office. I gave her family a sin, sod, a traditional marriage payment of 300,000 baht, about 11,000 Canadian dollars. May had been hesitant about accepting it, saying it was too much and not necessary for a second marriage between 2 adults, but her parents had seemed to expect it, and I wanted to honor the cultural tradition. Looking back, that's when the first small deviation occurred, but I didn't see it at the time. After the wedding, practical realities became impossible to ignore. I was living in Thailand on a tourist visa that required me to leave the country every 90 days. I needed to establish proper residency, ideally through a retirement visa or marriage visa. That meant dealing with Thai bureaucracy, which May assured me was notoriously complex and confusing for foreigners. She offered to handle it. She worked in hospitality, dealt with visa issues for hotel guests regularly, understood the system. Why should I waste time trying to navigate government offices when she could do it efficiently in Thai? It made sense. I didn't speak Thai well enough to handle bureaucratic conversations. I didn't understand which documents were needed or where to obtain them. I trusted my wife to manage it. That's when the pattern started. May would come home with forms that needed my signature. She'd explain briefly what they were: visa applications, address registrations, bank documents required by immigration, and indicate where I should sign. The documents were entirely in Thai. I couldn't read them. "I should sign here?" I'd ask, pointing at the signature line. "Yes, and here," she'd say, pointing at another spot. "These are just standard immigration forms. You need to sign and date." I'd sign. Why wouldn't I? She was my wife. Then came the banking issues. May suggested we open a joint account to make household management easier. I could transfer my pension payments there, And she could handle the monthly bills, rent, utilities, phone service, food, all the small expenses that added up. Again, it made sense. She understood Thai banking systems, spoke the language, could handle transactions efficiently. We went to Capricorn Bank together, and she did all the talking with the bank representative. They spoke rapidly in Thai, exchanging documents I couldn't read, filling out forms while occasionally asking me for my passport or to sign various papers. The account was established. May set up online banking access for both of us, showing me how to check the balance on my phone. "See," she said, pointing at the screen showing our joint account balance. "Everything is transparent. You can check any time." I appreciated her efficiency. I appreciated not having to struggle through bureaucratic processes in a language I barely spoke. I appreciated having a partner who took care of these tedious practical matters. But then I started noticing small irregularities. It began with a bank alert on my phone, a notification about a transaction from an account I didn't recognize. When I mentioned it to May, she looked at the notification and waved it off. "Oh, that's the account we opened for the visa application," she said. "Immigration requires proof of funds in a specific type of account. Remember? We did that paperwork last month." I didn't remember, but we'd done so much paperwork, signed so many documents, that it seemed plausible I'd forgotten. Another week passed, another alert. This one for a transfer of 80,000 baht, about 3,000 Canadian dollars from an account listed in my name to an account number I didn't recognize. When I showed May, she seemed slightly annoyed. "Graham, I explained this already. These are the quarterly transfers for your visa maintenance. You need to show regular deposits into your Thai account to maintain your retirement visa status. I'm just moving money between your accounts to meet the requirements." She spoke with such certainty, such casual confidence, that I felt embarrassed for not understanding. Of course, she knew how this worked. I was the foreigner, stumbling through systems I didn't comprehend. But something nagged at me. In my years auditing corporate finances, I'd learned to pay attention to that nagging feeling. It usually meant something was wrong, even if I couldn't articulate what yet. I started paying closer attention. I could have confronted May immediately. I could have demanded detailed explanations for every transaction, insisted on translating every document, challenged her authority over our financial arrangements. But 30 years of conducting internal audits had taught me something crucial. People who are committing fraud become extremely careful when they realize they're being watched. They cover their tracks, destroy evidence, create plausible alternative explanations for everything you've noticed. If I confronted May too early, she'd either have a reasonable explanation that would make me feel foolish for doubting her, or she'd realize I was suspicious and start hiding her activities more carefully. So instead, I made a calculated decision. I would pretend to be exactly the confused, trusting foreigner she seemed to believe I was. I started asking basic questions repeatedly, as if I genuinely couldn't keep track of Thailand's complex bureaucratic requirements. "May, which account is for the visa again?" I'd ask, genuinely puzzled expression on my face. She'd explain patiently, perhaps with a hint of exasperation, a few days later. "And the immigration office needs quarterly proof of what exactly?" "Graham, we've been through this. They need to see regular deposits of at least 65,000 baht per month in your Thai account. That's the requirement for a retirement visa extension." "Oh, right. Sorry, I keep forgetting." I stopped checking our bank balances on my phone when she was around. I'd hand her my phone when banking notifications came through, acting as if I couldn't be bothered to decipher them myself. "Can you just tell me if this is something I need to worry about?" I'd ask, showing her alerts before I'd even read them myself. I could see her relax. The tension I'd noticed when I questioned the unusual transactions began to fade. She started explaining less, assuming I wouldn't understand anyway or wouldn't pay close attention if she did explain. Meanwhile, I was documenting everything. Every evening when May was in the shower or out with friends, I'd carefully photograph every document in our apartment. The visa paperwork, the bank statement she kept filed in folders in the closet, the letters from government offices, everything. I couldn't read Thai, but I could create a complete record. I started a habit of asking May to help me understand our finances by sitting down together once a week to review our accounts. I'd act confused, ask her to slowly show me which accounts were which, what each transaction meant. I'd write down what she told me in a notebook, making small errors that she'd patiently correct. She believed she was teaching me. In reality, I was documenting her explanations so I could later check them against actual records. I also started withdrawing cash regularly. Not huge amounts, 10,000 or 15,000 baht at a time, maybe once every week or two. Officially, it was for daily expenses, small purchases, things that are easier to pay for in cash. May didn't question it. Why would she? I was simply taking money from our joint account for legitimate household needs. But I wasn't spending that cash. I was storing it in a small fireproof safe I'd purchased and kept hidden in the back of my closet behind my winter clothes. Clothes I obviously didn't need in Bangkok's climate, so May had no reason to go through them. By late March 2023, I had about 280,000 baht in that safe, roughly 10,000 Canadian dollars. If things went wrong, I wanted cash that she couldn't access or freeze. By April 2023, I'd identified a clear pattern. Every 4 to 6 weeks, there would be a transaction I didn't recognize. May's explanations were always plausible: visa maintenance, government fees, required insurance payments, property tax for foreigners living in Thailand, deposits into special accounts that immigration monitoring. But the explanations never quite matched when I later tried to research Thai visa requirements online. The amounts were irregular, and May was always just slightly annoyed when I asked for clarification, as if I was being unnecessarily paranoid or couldn't understand perfectly normal administrative processes. That's when I made contact with someone who could help me understand what was really happening. Through an expat forum I'd been quietly reading, I found a recommendation for a bilingual forensic accountant who specialized in helping foreigners navigate complex financial situations in Thailand. His name was Thongchai Pimolphan, and he ran a small practice in the Siloam Financial District. I contacted him through email, explaining that I needed help understanding my financial arrangements in Thailand, but that absolute confidentiality was essential. Could we meet somewhere other than his office? We met at a Starbucks in a shopping mall far from where May worked. I brought printed copies of every transaction I'd been able to access from our various bank accounts, along with photographs of the documents May had had me sign. Thongchai was in his mid-50s, wearing rimless glasses and speaking English with the precise diction of someone who'd studied accounting in the UK. He spread my documents across the coffee shop table and spent nearly an hour reviewing them, occasionally making notes, asking me clarifying questions about dates and circumstances. Finally, he looked up at me with an expression I recognized from my own career, the expression of an auditor who's found evidence of systematic fraud. "Mr. Whitmore," he said quietly, "have you given your wife power of attorney over any of your accounts?" "No, absolutely not." "Has she ever asked you to sign documents you didn't read carefully?" I paused. "Yes. She said they were visa and immigration forms. Everything was in Thai." Thongchai nodded slowly, then pointed to one of the document photos I'd provided. "This is not an immigration form," he said. "This is a loan application. According to the dates, you applied for and received a personal loan of 400,000 baht in October 2022. That's approximately 14,500 Canadian dollars. I felt my chest tighten. I never applied for a loan. According to Bangkok Bank's records, you did. Your signature is on the application. The money was deposited into an account in your name, then transferred out in stages over the following months. Transferred where? He pulled out another document, to an account registered to someone named Warinthra Kongsakul, your wife. We went through the rest of the documents methodically. Over the course of 8 months, May had opened 4 separate bank accounts in my name, taken out 2 personal loans totaling 650,000 baht using my signature and financial information, set up automatic monthly transfers from our joint account to bank accounts I couldn't access, created authorization letters which I'd unknowingly signed giving her limited power of attorney for specific transactions. The total amount she'd maneuvered out of my accessible funds? Approximately 920,000 baht, about 33,000 Canadian dollars. It wasn't catastrophic. I had that much and more in Canadian accounts she couldn't touch. But it wasn't the amount that devastated me. It was the systematic nature of it, the patience, the careful construction of a system that extracted money while keeping me confused and compliant. "How long has this been going on?" I asked. Thongchai pointed to the earliest document. "Based on these records, since November 2022, less than a month after your wedding." I walked out of that Starbucks meeting with a complete picture of May's scheme. and a crucial decision to make: confront her immediately or continue playing the part of the confused foreigner while building an even more comprehensive case. Thongchai's advice was clear. If you confront her now, she'll have explanations ready. These transactions aren't massive. She could claim misunderstandings, translation errors, cultural differences in financial management. You'd have your money returned perhaps, but no legal consequence for her behavior. She'd simply move on to her next target. His recommendation was cold but strategic. Continue as you have been. Let her believe she's succeeded. Document everything meticulously. When you have enough evidence of systematic fraud rather than isolated mistakes, then involve authorities. Otherwise, this ends with a messy divorce and no accountability. I spent 3 days thinking about it. Part of me wanted to confront May immediately, to see her reaction when I revealed I knew exactly what she'd been doing. But the more rational part, the part that had spent 3 decades investigating corporate fraud, recognized Thongchai was right. So I continued the performance, but with a specific goal now. I needed May to escalate. I needed her to feel so confident in her control that she'd commit fraud too obvious to explain away. I started making comments designed to suggest I was even more financially comfortable than she might have realized. I mentioned that my Canadian investments had performed well this quarter, better than expected. I talked about potentially purchasing a condo in Bangkok rather than continuing to rent, saying I had enough liquid savings to buy something modest outright. I discussed maybe bringing more of my Canadian funds to Thailand to take advantage of favorable exchange rates. Every comment was calculated to make May believe there was significantly more money available than she'd already accessed. I could see it working. She became more attentive, more affectionate. She started bringing up larger expenses we could consider. Maybe a car would be practical, or we could take a nice vacation to southern Thailand, or perhaps help her family with some home renovations they needed. In June 2023, she made her critical mistake. "Graham," she said one evening, "I need to talk to you about something serious. My parents' shop is in trouble. The building owner is raising their rent dramatically, and they can't afford the increase. If they don't pay, they'll lose the shop they've run for 23 years. How much do they need?" She paused, as if reluctant to say. 200,000 baht. It's a lot, I know. I wouldn't ask, but they're my parents. That shop is their whole life. 200,000 baht was about 7,000 Canadian dollars. It was significant, but not unreasonable for an emergency. And I genuinely liked her parents. They'd always been warm to me. "Of course I'll help," I said. "They're family now." May's relief looked genuine. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you. This means everything to them. I'll arrange the transfer tomorrow." But I'd learned. This time, I insisted on doing the transfer myself. "I want to do this properly," I said. "From my account directly to theirs. Can you give me their account information?" For just a moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Uncertainty, concern, but it passed quickly, replaced by a grateful smile. "Of course, I'll write down their information for you." She gave me an account number. The next day, while she was at work, I went to the bank and initiated the transfer personally, keeping all documentation. But I also did something else. I asked the bank representative to confirm the account holder's name. The account wasn't registered to her parents. It was registered to Warinthra Kongsakul. I completed the transfer anyway. I wanted her to believe she'd succeeded. That evening, she thanked me emotionally, saying her parents were so grateful that I'd saved their business. Every word was a lie. And now I had proof that she was fabricating emergencies to extract money directly. Over the next 2 months, I worked with Thongchai to build an irrefutable case. We obtained complete banking records for every account opened in my name, including the loan applications I never knowingly authorized, certified translations of all documents I'd signed, proving several were loan agreements and authorization letters rather than visa paperwork. As May had claimed, evidence that the family emergency transfer went directly to May's personal account. Timeline documentation, showing the pattern of financial requests escalating after each successful extraction. Thongchai also discovered something that changed my understanding of the situation entirely. I wasn't May's first target. Through contacts in the banking sector, he found records of 2 previous foreign men, one British, one Australian, who'd filed police reports about similar schemes. The complaints had gone nowhere. The amounts were relatively small. The men had returned to their home countries. And Thai authorities had limited resources to investigate cross-border financial crimes that victims couldn't even prove were intentional fraud versus marital disputes. But the pattern was identical. Both men had met May through her work at hotels. Both had married her within months. Both had signed documents in Thai they couldn't read. Both had discovered unauthorized transactions only after significant amounts had been moved. The British man had lost £47,000 over 14 months. The Australian man had lost 62,000 Australian dollars over 11 months. I'd lost 33,000 Canadian dollars in 8 months. I was simply the latest iteration of a practice system. This changed everything. This wasn't a wife struggling with temptation or making poor choices. This was a career criminal who'd refined her approach with each victim. In August 2023, Thongchai informed me we had enough documentation to file a formal police report with a reasonable chance of criminal prosecution. The evidence showed systematic fraud, forgery of documents, and identity theft, all criminal offenses under Thai law. "Are you ready to proceed?" he asked during our final meeting at the same Starbucks where we'd first met 3 months earlier. I thought about May at home, probably preparing dinner, believing everything was fine, believing I was the confused foreigner who'd never quite understood what was happening. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." Thai law enforcement operates differently than Canadian police services. You can't simply walk into a station and file a report expecting immediate investigation. You need documentation, you need witnesses, you need a paper trail that makes the crime undeniable. Thongchai had prepared all of it. On August 15, 2023, I went to the Economic Crime Suppression Division in Bangkok, the specialized unit that handles financial fraud cases. I brought a complete case file, certified bank statements, document translations, the loan applications bearing forged authorization, evidence of the fabricated family emergency, and contact information for the 2 previous foreign victims who'd agreed to provide statements. The investigating officer was a woman in her 40s named Lieutenant Colonel Siraporn. She spoke English well and reviewed my documentation with the same careful attention I'd once brought to corporate audits. After nearly 2 hours, she looked up at me. "Mr. Whitmore, you understand this will result in criminal charges against your wife? This isn't a civil matter we're discussing." "I understand." "And you're prepared for this to become public?" In Thailand, cases like this often attract media attention. I hadn't considered that, but I nodded. "I'm prepared." She made some notes. "We'll need your wife to come in for questioning. We'll contact her at the address you've provided. I recommend you not be present when we make initial contact." I spent that night in a hotel. I didn't tell May where I was going, just said I had to travel to immigration offices in another province for visa issues and would be back the next day. The next afternoon, Lieutenant Colonel Siraporn called me. "Your wife attended the interview this morning. She initially denied all allegations. However, when presented with the banking evidence and the testimony from the 2 previous victims, she requested time to consult with a lawyer." "What happens now?" "We've initiated formal criminal proceedings for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. She's been released on bail but cannot leave Thailand while the investigation continues. The case will go to the prosecutor's office, who will determine what charges to file formally. And the money she took? That will be part of the civil restitution if she's convicted. However, Mr. Whitmore, I must be honest with you, financial recovery in these cases is often incomplete. People who commit fraud usually don't maintain large savings." I understood. I'd never expected to recover everything. This wasn't about money anymore. The criminal case moved slowly through Thailand's legal system. May hired a lawyer who initially tried to frame everything as marital misunderstandings, cultural differences in financial management, and my own negligence in signing documents I didn't understand. But the evidence was too systematic. The prosecutor's office had 3 victims, all following identical patterns. The loan applications bearing forged signatures were verified by handwriting analysis. The fabricated family emergency was disproven by her parents themselves, who testified they'd never asked for money and hadn't been facing eviction. In December 2023, May accepted a plea agreement. She pled guilty to multiple counts of fraud and forgery in exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months in prison, and in order to repay 40% of the total she'd stolen from all 3 victims, an amount she clearly didn't have and likely would never fully repay. The marriage was legally dissolved as part of the proceedings. I didn't attend the final hearing. I recovered about 94,000 baht through the legal process, roughly 3,400 Canadian dollars. The rest was gone, likely spent long before I'd even realized it was missing. But I protected the majority of my assets. The 280,000 baht in cash I'd hidden, May never discovered. The Canadian accounts she'd had no access to remained intact. I still had my pension, my investments, my ability to continue living comfortably. I moved to Chiang Mai in January 2024, wanting distance from Bangkok and the memories it held. I rented a small house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy, and started the process of genuinely learning Thai language and culture this time, without relying on anyone to interpret or explain things for me. The story attracted some media attention in Thailand, particularly after journalists discovered May's pattern of targeting foreign men. I did one interview with an English-language newspaper, hoping my experience might prevent others from becoming victims. The reporter asked me how I'd maintained such composure during the 3 months I'd known May was stealing from me. I told her the truth. In my career, I learned that the worst time to make a decision is when you're emotional. Anger makes you reactive. Fear makes you defensive. If you wait, if you observe, if you document, then you respond from a position of strength rather than panic. She asked if I felt betrayed. Of course. But I also felt something else. Familiar. I'd spent 30 years investigating people who'd convinced themselves that small deviations from honesty were acceptable, that they deserved what they were taking, that they were justified in their deceptions. May was the same pattern, just in a different context. Would you warn other foreign men about relationships in Thailand? I thought carefully about my answer. No. Thailand isn't the problem. Loneliness is the problem. Desperation for connection is the problem. The belief that love should be easy and immediate is the problem. Those vulnerabilities exist everywhere. Scammers just follow the vulnerable. It's now September 2024, more than a year since I filed the police report that ended my second marriage. I'm 60 years old, living in Chiang Mai, and slowly rebuilding a life based on honest connections rather than romantic fantasy. I've learned Thai to conversational fluency, not perfectly, but enough to handle my own banking, read my own documents, understand my own visa requirements, without needing an interpreter. I've made friends here, other expats, and some Thai people who appreciate someone genuinely interested in their culture rather than just consuming its surface pleasures. I'm not opposed to future relationships. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Real love doesn't require you to sign documents you can't read. Real partnership doesn't create constant confusion about money. Real trust doesn't demand that you prove yourself through financial surrender. The warning signs were always there. I just chose not to see them because I wanted so badly for this relationship to be real, to be different from my first marriage, to prove that I could still attract someone beautiful and young and vital. May didn't underestimate my intelligence. She underestimated my patience. She assumed that because I seemed confused, I was unable to understand. She confused my questions for ignorance rather than investigation. She believed that my calm acceptance meant I wasn't paying attention. That was her critical error. If I'd confronted her immediately the first time I noticed a suspicious transaction, she would have had plausible explanations ready. She would have been cautious. I would have never uncovered the systematic nature of her fraud or the fact that I was victim number 3 in an established pattern. But by pretending to be exactly the confused, trusting foreigner she thought I was, I gave her the confidence to escalate. And escalation creates evidence. 6 months ago, I received an email from a man in Denmark who'd read about my case. He was 53, had met a Thai woman online, and was planning to move to Bangkok to marry her. He'd sent her about 15,000 euros over 8 months for various emergencies, and his adult children were begging him to reconsider. He wanted to know if I thought he was making a mistake. I wrote back with one question. Can you read Thai? He replied, no, but she speaks perfect English and has been very helpful explaining everything I need to know about living there. I sent him a longer email. I told him my story in detail. I told him about the documents I couldn't read, the transactions I didn't understand, the escalating pattern of emergencies that required my financial intervention. I told him about the 3 months I spent pretending to be naive while documenting systematic fraud. I told him, if someone truly loves you, they'll help you understand things, not just handle things for you. Partnership means teaching, not just managing. And if you can't read the documents you're signing, You're not in control. You're just hoping the person who can read them has your best interests in mind. He wrote back 2 weeks later. He'd hired a private investigator in Thailand who discovered the woman he'd been sending money to was married to a Thai man and had never worked at the hotel she'd claimed. The photos she'd sent were from a modeling portfolio she'd purchased access to online. He thanked me for saving him from what would have been the worst mistake of his life. That email made the entire humiliating experience feel slightly less pointless. My name is Graham Whitmore. I lost 33,000 Canadian dollars in 9 months of my life to a woman who saw me as a mark rather than a husband. But I recovered. I protected the majority of my assets. And I helped put someone in prison who'd been systematically targeting vulnerable foreign men for years. If you're reading this, if you're someone considering a relationship with a person from another country, someone who's offering to handle all your paperwork, someone who keeps having emergencies that require your money, please remember this. Confusion is often intentional. Complexity is often manufactured. And genuine love never requires you to sign documents in a language you can't read. If someone says, "Just trust me," stop. If someone says, "This is how it works here," you wouldn't understand, stop. If someone gets annoyed when you ask for written explanations or want to verify information independently, stop. Real partners want you to understand. Real partners teach you how systems work. Real partners don't benefit from your confusion. The easiest victim is someone who reacts emotionally instead of thinking systematically. The easiest target is someone so desperate for love that they'll accept obvious red flags as cultural differences. I was that person for almost a year. I ignored red flags. I accepted confusion as normal. I wanted so badly for May to be real that I rationalized every warning sign. The only thing that saved me was patience. The patience to watch, to document, to build a case rather than react emotionally. If you find yourself in a situation where someone is managing your finances in a language you don't speak, where emergency follows emergency, where your questions are met with impatience or accusations of mistrust, start documenting. Stay calm. Verify independently. Build evidence. And if you discover you're being scammed, don't confront immediately. People who commit fraud are skilled at creating plausible explanations when caught early. Let them escalate. Let them feel confident. Let them create undeniable evidence of their systematic deception. Then, and only then, involve authorities with a complete case they can't dismiss as a marital dispute. That's what saved me. That's what put May in prison. That's what prevented her from finding a fourth victim. Patience isn't passive. Sometimes, patience is the most effective action you can take. If this story resonated with you, if you know someone who might benefit from hearing it, please share it. And if you want to support this channel so I can continue telling stories that most people are too ashamed to share, there's a subscribe button right there. Thank you for listening. Stay careful out there.